Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Lily Ray, and today I'm going to be talking about how I use the Conductor MCP. And I find the Conductor MCP especially helpful because it really helps to ground ChatGPT's responses in real, validated conductor data, which reduces the risks of hallucinations and unsupported claims in ChatGPT. So instead of relying on assumptions or general knowledge, ChatGPT is basically constrained to analyzing actual brand mentions, citations, sentiment, and other competitive data that's directly coming from Conductor, which ensures that the outputs are evidence-based and not hallucinated. So this creates much more like trustworthy, repeatable insights that my team and I can confidently use for decision-making, reporting, and strategy. So what I really like about using the Conductor MCP is that it reduces hallucinations. And when you're asking open-ended questions to ChatGPT, it's pretty common for it to answer. It's always going to provide an answer, even if the answer is not 100% accurate. So by using an MCP and connecting into Conductor's actual internal data, we're reducing that risk of hallucinations. We're actually pulling true, accurate information directly from Conductor, but then benefiting from this really easy to use, chat interface directly on ChatGPT. So if I have the, MCP turned off and I ask it some generic questions about Apple and AI search. So let's actually see if we can turn this off. And let's say, tell me about Apple's visibility in AI search and how frequently the brand is mentioned in ChatGPT. So what it's doing is it's actually searching the web. So you can quickly see when, ChatGPT is answering a question. When it doesn't say anything, it's usually just using its own internal training data. But when you could see it's searching the web here. So this is somewhat helpful because you can see the different sources that it's, using to answer this question. But in reality, this is not giving us the exact data that Conductor would actually have access to when it's tracking real prompts and seeing how visible the brand actually is within ChatGPT. So this is somewhat helpful, but it's even more helpful when you connect Conductor and you can ask that same question. And because I have Conductor turned on now, you can see that first it's thinking and then calling tool. So again, that calling tool is really important because we know that it's going directly into the Conductor MCP to answer this question with real data. So now I can see specifically within ChatGPT, Apple has exceptionally high visibility, but it's earned implicitly not because Apple is optimizing for AI SEO, which is interesting. And then it's going to tell us the different categories where Apple appears frequently. So product comparisons, ecosystems and platform questions, AI capability questions. And then it's going to give us kind of an analysis of why Apple's performing so well. It has entity dominance, it has brand associations, lots of third-party coverage, AI native relevance, and how frequently it's mentioned in ChatGPT. So this one kind of looks like almost like some analysis from ChatGPT. So first, I'm going to enter in some questions into ChatGPT directly, and you can see here that it's integrated with the Conductor MCP. And we're going to be asking some questions about Apple, which is the brand that we're using to monitor brand mentions and citations and some other metrics directly within Conductor. So to get started, I am going to type, for which topics does Apple currently have the highest number of brand mentions? And you can see that I have Conductor enabled here. So it's going to be using the MCP. And I always look for ChatGPT confirming that it's first looking for available tools and then calling the Conductor tool. So if you don't see it doing that, you have to be careful because it might just be pulling from its own training as opposed to from the MCP. But here you can see that it's pulling directly from Conductor. So in terms of topics where Apple is leading in brand mentions, it's telling us, according to some Conductor data, that the HomePod Mini smart speaker, as well as AirPods and audio, are topics where Apple has a lot of brand mentions currently in AI search. And some topics where it's highly visible but not consistently number one would be Apple TV Plus original content. So this is kind of a nice lay of the land in terms of the topics where we're getting the most brand mentions. And something else we can ask would be, for which topics does Apple have the most brand mentions across all topics? So if we look at Apple brand rows only and compare to total brand mentions by topics, we can see that, again, it's the HomePod mini smart speaker, AirPods and audio, and Apple TV Plus original content. And then what's nice is it also includes this TLDR. So across all track topics, the most brand mentions are concentrated among smart speakers, audio and wearables, and then streaming content trailing just behind in total volume. And then what's nice is ChatGPT also provides some options for how to like normalize the data. But I do want to ask, for which topics have the most unbranded queries that still include brand mentions for Apple? And what's nice about this is it kind of shows topics where people might not be explicitly searching for Apple, but they're still finding Apple in the answers. So this is a potential area where we could expand our brand influence a bit more. So the tool is looking at topics where Apple is frequently mentioned, even if the query itself is not brand specific. So this is interesting. It's basically showing that the signal is coming from third-party publishers like YouTube, Wikipedia, Tom's Guide, Artings, and TechRadar, which dominates citations. So this is what I would refer to as like third-party content or like editorial or often review content. So, when people are talking about HomePod mini smart speakers, they're going to be talking about Apple quite a bit in the context of best smart speaker comparison. And Apple is frequently referenced even when not explicitly searched for. So again, we have a lot of visibility in this mini smart speaker category. And for AirPods and audio, we have a lot of citations coming from Sound Guys, Artings, Tom's Guide, TechRadar, and YouTube. So that we can also say, can you provide a list of some of the top cited URLs that mention Apple for these non-branded queries? So ChatGPT is telling me that we actually can't see individual URLs, but we can actually see top cited publishers. So in this case, it's going to be returning the top domains. And it actually it's giving us representative URLs. So this is something where you do want to be a little bit careful, because when ChatGPT comes up with its own URLs, they're not always 100% accurate. But this is still helpful because I know, when I'm looking at for HomePod mini smart speakers, for example, it's looking at these different domains like YouTube, Artings, What Hi-Fi, TechRadar, Tom's Guide. So these are the types of domains that I would want to focus on when I'm kind of focusing in on brand mentions. So another thing that we can do with the MCP is we can look at competitive data. So what we can do is say, who are Apple's biggest competitors by brand market share? And this is going to show, within AI search specifically, who do the models basically consider to be Apple's biggest competitors, like who's getting the most brand mentions for the different queries and topics that we're focused on. So when we look at brand market share, the biggest competitors that have the most overlap with Apple would be Netflix. And then it tells you that's specific to streaming and original content topics. Then we have Amazon, where there's a lot of crossover with smart speakers, commerce and device comparisons. And then for Google, it's smart home ecosystems and assistants and connected devices. Then we also have secondary competitors, Disney, Hulu, and Sony. And one thing we could do is, with ChatGPT, sometimes it's helpful to like visualize this data in different ways or kind of set up the answer in a different way so you can just see it more easily visually. So I can say, show the above information in a table. Yeah, so I like this one because it kind of lays out the topics where the competitors are overlapping and who are the relative market share leaders compared to Apple across these different categories. And then also what's the context here? Because, Apple's obviously a huge company. It does a lot of different things. So this table is helpful for understanding, you know, when we talk about TV, like Apple TV Plus, for example, obviously we're going to be talking about Hulu and Disney, but there's different types of competitors for different products that Apple offers. So we can also ask what topics and queries does, and let's pick one of our competitors here. Let's do Google, perform well on in terms of brand mentions compared to Apple. So yeah, this is nice again because Apple has, again, it does a lot of different things. It has a lot of different, categories that it works within. So now we can see that Google does not dominate Apple's core product-led topics. So like the HomePod, AirPods, Apple TV Plus, but it's more about the ecosystem, the assistant, and platform level queries. So this is really nice because what we can do is we can drill down into specific topic areas where Google would be considered a competitor to Apple. And then we can see who's the outperformer. So for smart home and voice assistants, we can see that Google appears more frequently in assistant first and ecosystem queries, and then some examples of the queries. So when we type best smart home assistant or ask about best smart home assistant, we can see that Google's appearing more frequently than Apple. And then we have some comparison keywords like Android versus iOS. And we can see that Google has strong parity or advantage due to Android framing. So this is nice because it kind of drills down into like what are the specific queries and subtopics where Google would kind of outperform Apple, but obviously it's not going to be for all categories that Apple, covers or talks about in its content. And these are queries specifically. This is a great call out where Google's mentioned more often than Apple. So things like best smart assistant, I think that's something where definitely, we'd want to focus on what is Google doing to get, more visibility in AI search for that type of keyword, because I imagine that's something that Apple definitely cares about. Best smart home ecosystem, Google Maps versus Apple Maps. So we can see like some of the rationale for why Google's benefiting. So it has category ownership between search maps and AI. It has an assistant first framing, which is kind of outperforming Siri, and then platform breadth with Android and its other services. So then we can also see on the flip side where Apple's still winning. So smart speakers and hardware, audio and wearables, and then services that are tied to specific devices like Apple TV Plus and Apple Music. And then we have some strategic takeaways. So we could kind of repeat this for each of the different competitors and just understand like where those competitors, for which products and topics are those competitors outperforming Apple, which is really helpful because at the end of the day, there's no, apples to apples like perfect competitor. There's going to be lots of different competitors that do different things. And then we can do, let's see. Let's kind of do the flip side and say, list the queries where Apple beats, how about its other competitor, Amazon, in brand mentions. So this can highlight Apple's competitive strengths and the areas where, existing positioning and content are really working well in AI search. So these are the queries where Apple is beating Amazon in brand mentions. Audio and personal devices. Apple's outperforming Amazon decisively due to AirPods dominance and weak Amazon branded audio products outside of the Echo. So for queries like best wireless earbuds, best earbuds for iPhone, noise canceling earbuds, and AirPods versus competitor, we're seeing that the AirPods are basically treated as a category default. And Amazon is basically lacking a strong consumer audio brand outside of smart speakers. So one thing that I might do at this point, we did the table before, but I might make a kind of even more basic table. So create a table outlining all of the competitors to Apple and make sure one of the columns indicates the main types of products or the major category for which each competitor is competing with Apple for brand mentions in AI search. So yeah, this one is similar to our table above, but what I like about it is that we have each competitor laid out because as you can see, since Apple does a lot of different things, like for Amazon, it's really considered a competitor when it comes down to like the Echo, Alexa, Prime Video, and Fire TV. But that's totally different than someone like Samsung, or even someone like Spotify. For Samsung, we're seeing like actual physical smartphone and consumer devices, like Galaxy phones, earbuds, and TVs. And for Spotify, they're going to be a competitor to Apple in the sense that they have music and audio streaming. So I like this table because this gives us a kind of like, broken out list of competitors based on the different products and categories that they're competing against. Now we can even do a pie chart. So let's show me a pie chart of share of voice for Apple, or between Apple and its top competitors. So this is cool because it shows basically based on all the different queries that we're monitoring, who has the greatest share of voice in AI search. And you can see clearly that it's Apple, 57.2%. And what I would like to do here is see if it can you provide a list of the prompts used to build this pie chart. So it's based on aggregated brand mentions across many unbranded comparative and discovery-oriented prompts. So I think this is always important to do when you're analyzing anything with AI search, is to understand what are the inputs, right? So which are the prompts that we are actually monitoring to be able to do something like building these pie charts? Because if we don't know what the inputs are, it's very hard to say what our share of voice actually is. We need to know what we're comparing it against. So that's why I ask ChatGPT here to kind of give me the lay of the land in terms of what are the prompts that we're actually analyzing. And then we can basically see, like, I wonder if there's a way to say, if we just focus on, let's do, why don't we do assistant? Can you show the same pie chart, but only focus on assistant, AI, and platform related queries? So in this case, what I want to do is, instead of looking at the whole market of all the different topics that we're tracking, is to drill down into one specific subtopic and see what the competitive landscape looks like for that topic. So that's really interesting. You can see it's quite different here. Whereas before we saw Apple was the leader, now we're seeing Apple's at 15.2% compared to Google being at 34.8%. So something I think would be helpful as you're using this MCP is to not only do total share of voice, but to basically do category specific share of voice, because you're going to have different competitors for different types of categories. Show me the tools and data available via Conductor for analyzing Apple. So this prompt basically helps understand what are all the different tools that I have at my disposal when I'm using the Conductor MCP. And this is really helpful because, it's pretty open-ended when you're using ChatGPT, and you want to be able that you're actually you want to be able to make sure that you're actually asking questions that are going to pull up, helpful data. So by kind of getting the lay of the land in terms of like what data is available to me through this MCP, you can ask what are the available tools and data, and it's going to return, brand market share plus these different fields that I can ask for. So brand mention count, total mentions, sentiment score, topics, intent, persona, different types of AI engines, model, and then language and locale. So this is really helpful because then I can kind of know what I'm working with. So something I might want to say is, if we look again at citations, what are the top cited domains within the assistant/AI category? So it's looking at citation dominance within assistant, AI, and platform-driven queries. So it's not like there isn't like a specific topic, I guess, that's named assistant, but it's kind of creating this custom filter to look at the top cited domains that have to do with anything related to assistant, AI, and platform-driven queries. And so this is cool. We can see the top domain citation sources for anything related to assistant, AI, and platforms. And we can see Wikipedia, YouTube, Google support, Amazon, and Apple support are showing up consistently, which makes a lot of sense. It's kind of like, controlled branded information. And then we have tier two, which is more editorial and explainer authorities. I think this is where things get really helpful, especially as it relates to like PR outreach and digital PR and really trying to earn brand mentions off site. You want to make sure that you're being featured in these publications for these types of topics because they're the most heavily cited in AI search. And then we have technical and developer adjacent resources. These aren't always the easiest to get mentioned on, but it's definitely something you want to consider. If you have technical content, you want to make sure that there's at least, even if it's on your own website or maybe on GitHub, you have your brand being mentioned in these technical conversations. And then it's also nice because ChatGPT is giving us this kind of like strategic takeaway for all the different places that, Apple might be mentioned in the context of AI and assistance. How has Apple's brand mention share of voice changed over time based on this available data? So this is nice because we can kind of get like a trended view of the share of voice history over time, which is always nice to see. I think this is something that with AI search, a lot of companies are really looking for KPIs to measure how visible they are over time. So I think trended share of voice is really helpful. And this is great because now we can see basically week over week comparisons for how many brand mentions Apple's seeing and the estimated share of voice across 2 weekly data points. Can you show the same week over week trend for Apple, but include 3 major competitors? So now we can see not only Apple's trended share of voice over time, but we can also do the same for competitors as well. And I think this is really helpful because, again, it's understanding the share of voice for AI search is very much contingent on which prompts you're tracking. So in this case, we can actually see, relative to the prompts that we're looking at and the brand mentions that we're looking at, who actually has the greatest, share of voice and what does that trend look like over time. So we can see week over week change as well. So this is a really nice way to kind of quickly get some high level insights about how you're trending over time. We can actually split this up by platform as well. So show me the breakdown of Apple brand mentions over time, um, broken out by different LLM. So this is great because not all large language models are the same, and I think it's really important to understand where your audience is spending their time, if they are using AI search, like which tools are they using the most. So what's nice about this is we can kind of see the breakdown based on different large language models. So we can either see ChatGPT, we can see Gemini or Sonar, and then some interpretation. So for example, the week of January 18th, 2026, we can see that Gemini performed slightly stronger than ChatGPT. And then we get some insights as well. So it's consistent across LLMs. Gemini slightly favors Apple in volume. So it has the highest Apple mention count week over week. And Sonar is the weakest surface. So for any of these queries that we're typing into the MCP here, we can actually ask for this breakout by different LLM. Where does Apple have the strongest and weakest brand mentions by search intent? So this is super helpful because this is kind of a nice example of how we can integrate some of our like traditional ways of analyzing prompts and questions and, user intent, the way that we've done it in SEO for a long time, and then kind of layer that on top of, AI search analysis. So when we break out the different types of intent, like seeking education and informational, it seems like Apple is treated as the canonical example brand when explaining products, categories, or ecosystems. So when you type things like, what is a smart speaker and how do AirPods work? We can see that Apple is showing up well to basically service those informational queries. And then for things like support, makes a lot of sense that Apple would show up for, branded queries related to customer support for different types of Apple products. For comparison, even when it's unbranded, we're seeing that Apple has some good, visibility for comparison keywords. For purchase high intent keywords, so best earbuds to buy and smart speaker for iPhone users, we can see that they're showing up as well. And for pricing, we can also see that for AirPods price, HomePod mini cost, and Apple TV Plus subscription price, we also see that Apple has strong presence. So this table represents where they currently have the most strengths in terms of AI search visibility by intent. And then what's also nice is we have this weakest intent for Apple. So when people are asking for recommendations, like content recommendations, we can see that Netflix, Hulu, and Disney Plus are outperforming Apple TV Plus. By broader libraries and algorithmic recommendations. And so that's something interesting that I might want to dig into more. So I can say, provide examples of the prompts where Netflix, Hulu, and Disney Plus have better visibility for recommendation oriented queries. So these are high recommendation queries where Apple TV Plus is typically underperforming. What should I watch right now? What are some good shows to watch? What should I binge watch next? Best shows to watch this weekend. It seems like Netflix and Hulu are treated as default recommendation engines, and genre based. So best drama series to watch, best TV dramas right now. And so I think what would be helpful at this point is that because we've had a number of different conversations already, using the Conductor MCP, we can start to kind of have ChatGPT help us to summarize a lot of the common patterns that we're seeing here. I mean, already here I'm seeing, I think, some clues that, there's certain types of content that competitors like Netflix and Disney Plus have on their site that maybe Apple doesn't have as much content, to target those types of queries. So what I might do is, based on the above analysis, or based on the above responses, provide a quick analysis of where competitors are currently outperforming Apple and content opportunities for Apple to increase its visibility in underperforming categories in AI search. So Apple's losing for queries like what should I watch, best shows right now, popular shows this week. Competitors are winning because they're the default for like trending and volume queries, I guess, or maybe they have the most volume. Hulu has a lot of next day TV and a lot of breadth. Disney Plus is instantly associated with family and kids. Apple TV is basically perceived as high quality, low breadth. I'm not entirely sure if they mean breadth in terms of the number of content, articles, and amount of content on the site, or whether they actually mean the inventory of Apple TV Plus content. But it's what's nice about ChatGPT is we can explain explain what you mean by breadth here, just for clarity. Coverage across the range of ways that users ask open-ended questions. So Netflix has breadth because it can satisfy genres, moods, moments, and audiences. So this is nice because, again, it's kind of speaking to potential lack of content to compete with competitors on these types of topics. So what I might do at this point is just say, using the above analysis, provide a few key takeaways about Apple's positioning. And let's just stick to this kind of like TV and entertainment category. In the TV entertainment category compared to competitors, and what Apple could do to increase its coverage in AI search. So we know that Apple's strengths are related to prestige, critically acclaimed originals, and brand trust, but competitors are stronger for what should I watch and what's popular. Hulu has greater breadth and recency, and then Disney's associated with family and kids. So Apple TV Plus is recommended more selectively, while competitors are recommended generically. Then we get some of the queries or some of the topics where Apple's underperforming. And competitors are winning by matching more types of contexts. So like more genres, more moods, more audiences in a single answer. So this is really helpful because now using all of this analysis, understanding the competition, understanding the queries and the topics for which competitors are getting more visibility than us, we can actually use ChatGPT and the Conductor MCP to then create recommendations for content. And this isn't like, 100% fleshed out, but at least it's giving us some directional guidance as to what types of content should we be thinking about producing if we want to become more competitive with our competitors. So what to watch if you liked blank, best shows for a quick watch, best shows by mood or genre, and then obviously looking within Apple TV Plus to figure out how to position that type of content. And it also recommends that Apple should have lightweight, frequently updated hubs around new and trending TV on Apple Plus or what's new this week. I've definitely seen that type of content perform really well for entertainment publishers. And you could have, here's what to watch for this situation, Apple included. So kind of like more discovery type content. And then an executive summary as well. So this is great because we went from really is like beginning by understanding what's the lay of the land, who are the different competitors, and then zooming into one specific category of topics. We looked at who are the specific competitors in that space, why are they winning, what are the topics that they're winning for, where do we have, shortcomings, where do we not have as much visibility, and then we can actually take that and, come up with some recommendations for new types of content that we need to build. Provide a summary of what we learned today, plus some actionable takeaways for Apple. This is really helpful because you can basically have these long conversations with ChatGPT, using the Conductor MCP, and you can learn lots of different things depending on the direction that your conversation goes. But then it's always helpful to kind of like within that same conversation, ask ChatGPT for a summary of what we learned, and it's going to basically go through that whole conversation and then, gather all the insights and summarize everything for you and give you some high level takeaways. So this is really helpful because if you want to move quickly, and really get an understanding of how a brand like Apple is positioned within AI search, you can get that all directly from, the ChatGPT interface using the MCP. So it's telling us that Apple's the overall brand leader, but the strength is uneven. It's telling us week over week performance across different LLMs. It's telling us the different types of queries where Apple is dominating. And then it's telling us where it's underperforming compared to different competitors like Netflix, Hulu, and Disney Plus. It tells us the types of queries where competitors are outperforming us. And then basically like the type of content you might want to build to be, on par with your competitors. And then it's saying that the core issue is breadth, not trust or quality, which is great because it just means that we need to, potentially build more content. But we did the hard part by getting, user trust and high quality content. So, Netflix has more content around genres, moods, and audiences. And then Google and Amazon have more systems level explanations. So basically, it's giving us, some guidance around the type of content we would want to build to be more competitive. And different attributes of Apple Plus that are maybe underrepresented, like broad discovery, genre, and mood recommendations, and then content or topics that are like currently active or trending prompts. And then this is great too because we have some, you know, published discovery first content recommendations, including Apple Plus naturally within broader recommendations, investing in explainer content and assistant content as well, like what voice assistants can and can't do. So what I love about this is like if you're working really quickly, for example, if you're doing like an RFP or if you are doing a pitch or just trying to understand the competitive landscape for a specific company, you can use the Conductor MCP to get the lay of the land, understand who the competitors are, understand what different topics the competitors have more or less share of voice in AI search compared to your company. And then it can actually drill down and tell you, like, within those different topics, where are the competitors over or underperforming compared to my brand, and what type of content would I need to build to be able to have more, competitive, more visibility in AI search compared to competitors. So I love doing this because that's the type of exercise we do in the agency world all the time. And this is, a really, really quick and easy way to get that data specifically for AI search. So Signing off for today. Hope you found that helpful, and good luck using the Conductor MCP.